everybody, welcome. Thank you for having me. This is my talk. All of you can read Dealing with Mental Illness or How I Learned to Dislike Myself Less. I am J.D. Flynn. My title officially is Technical Architect, which technically doesn't mean I'm an architect. It just means I can put together a Drupal site. If you want to tweet, I'm at JDDoesDev on all the Twitters, on every Slack, everywhere. I'm Dorf. This hashtag that you probably see everywhere. Decoupled Days 2019. And also, OSME Help. Are any of you familiar with OSME? Have you ever heard of them? Okay, a couple people. All right, I'm going to go into them a little bit later on. So I always like to start off with a big friendly greeting. So, hello.
Hello.
Hello. All right, there we go. All right. I also like to start off with a couple disclaimers because I like to cover my ass. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional or a mental health professional. I'm also not a lawyer, so I'm not here to give any legal advice. I also tend to swear without thinking about it, so I try to keep it PG-13. Now, if you're unfamiliar, PG-13 allows one F-bomb and tasteful nudity. If you're okay with it, I'm going to skip the nudity and maybe give myself an extra F-bomb, if that's all right. Okay. And I'm also going to go into a bit of detail, quite a bit. Big question, why are we here? Now, I don't mean that in the big philosophical existential crisis way. I mean, why are we here today? For me, I'm here to talk with you about something very important to me. Hopefully you're here because you want to learn something, take part in a conversation, and I'm also here to tell a story. I hope that my story helps someone in the way another person's story helped me. So as I said, I'm here to have a conversation, so let's have a conversation, starting with you. You're going to learn a lot about me, so I'd like to know who I'm talking with. How many of you are developers, designers, anything directly related to making sites or programming? The majority of the room. Are any of you project managers, project owners, account managers, similar to that? Okay. Anybody in HR? Okay. A little bit of freedom now, but I wish that people from HR would show up because this is really directed towards them. Anybody in upper management, CEOs, presidents, high level? Okay. All right, my turn. I've been a Drupal and PHP developer for about 6 years. I've been doing HTML since the 90s. Started learning BASIC around the same time. And I learned that, are any of you familiar with a magazine called 321 Contact? It also used to be a show on PBS. Yeah, a couple hands going up. So in the back of the magazine, there was a BASIC program printed, that you would have to take every character from that and copy it and hope that you copied right. And when you pressed F5 to try and run it, hope that it didn't break. But it was a good intro to debugging stuff. I also help organize MidCamp, which is the Chicago area Drupal camp. I help organize the Chicago meetup. And before this life, I was a paramedic for about 10 years. On top of all that, I have mental illnesses, plural. Now, big question, why do I care? Why do I do this? Well, for a long time, I suffered in silence. I was in denial. I was afraid that admitting that I had something would make it real. I was in perfect health until a doctor told me otherwise. No diagnosis means I'm 100%. And I worried that if I told people how I was feeling, what I was thinking, what was going through my mind, they'd treat me differently. But now, something I need to tell myself, but I really have a hard time convincing myself of, is I'm not weak, I'm sick. I'm not damaged, I have a disease, and it's not a choice, it's a condition. I'm going to be talking about mental illness quite a bit, otherwise I could dismiss you all right now and you could get an early lunch, but sorry, I'm going to keep going. Mental illness is a wide range of mental health conditions or disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. There's a book called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's why I call it DSM, because it's much easier to say. And it's currently on the 5th edition. The book stands about this tall from the floor, and it gives all the criteria for diagnosing mental illness. The latest version was published in 2013. The first version was published in 1952, so it's really only been around about 60 or 70 years. Not that long, all things considered. The latest version has about 150 individual diagnoses, which don't include the different versions of it, bipolar type 1, bipolar type 2, recurrent depressive disorder. If you added all of those, it would be well over 600. I'm also here to talk about the stigma around mental illness. And in case you're not familiar, there is a stigma around mental illness. The reason, is that for centuries, people with mental illness were treated as less than. They were grouped with criminals. They were grouped with witches. They were grouped with demonically possessed. Any excuse to not treat them and just take away from their personhood, which led to stereotypes that people with mental illness are dangerous because they were grouped with the criminals, put into asylums, or just shunned away. And people weren't seen as people. They were their disease. That's all that they were seen as. There was no such thing as person-first terminology. It wasn't a person with schizophrenia, it was a schizophrenic. Somebody was bipolar, not a person with bipolar disorder. Or the mentally ill compared to somebody with mental illness. There was a study by Ohio State University, I think in 2016, where they had a survey that went out to about 200 people. Half of the people had some terminology, half of the people had the other. And they found that there was an extreme difference in how many people answered more negatively to the questions. Now the questions were, how would you feel living next to blank? One half had a person with mental illness, the other half had the mentally ill. Putting that disease first really changed the responses. So person first terminology is a really big thing. But going on, using the non-person first terminology, it led to people using mental illness as an insult, saying, oh, they're just off their meds. Oh, they're schizo, they're psycho, And then that led to self-stigma, which is the feeling that your disease defines you, that you are not the person, you are the disease, and that you're a burden. Now, these are more issue tags than actual issue cues, but you kind of get the idea. This is what I go through. Major depression, anxiety disorder, PTSD, ADHD, and TBD. And I say TBD because there's so much comorbidity or coexisting conditions, I'm bound to have another one. There's so much interchangeability, and a lot of diseases can mimic other ones depending on the situation. I also like to think that I'm one diagnosis away from mental illness bingo. I'm not sure what the prize is, but... Right, so I'm going to define all these for clarity. Major depression is feelings of low self-worth or guilt and a reduced ability to enjoy life with symptoms present for every day for at least 2 weeks. Anxiety disorder. Characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with daily activities. See that little green spot right there? That's your amygdala. That is basically your lizard brain. Go way back in evolution, has 4 basic functions. Fight or flight, feed or breed. That's what it does. Now, if you have anxiety, my amygdala, I get freaked out about just about everything. Anything scares me, it's overactive. So, PTSD. It's a failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. I had a really hard time understanding this until I was talking with a psychologist. Right after he asked me to fix his printer, he gave me a good metaphor using computers. So, think of your brain as a computer. You've got your CPU, your RAM, and your hard disk. Your RAM is your short-term memory. It's really close to the CPU. Things are moving back and forth really quickly, just getting the information there. The hard disk is your long-term memory. It takes a little bit longer to get there, but you can pull up as you need. When somebody has PTSD, an event gets stuck in that short-term memory, in the RAM. So it's really quick to go back and forth between reliving it, and any sight, sound, smell, sensation can make a person relive it. Not just remember it, but actually go through the emotion, have the same feelings that they had during that event. And that made a lot of sense to me. And then I charged him $20 for fixing his printer. ADHD. Varying levels of hyperactivity, impulsivity, or inattention that lead to difficulty in academic, emotional, and social functioning. That's a lot of words. But when I was a kid, for one, I didn't have treatment. For two, I was just seen as a troublemaker because I would get bored. I wouldn't do my homework. I wouldn't be able to sit in one place for very long. I was just, go put your nose against the wall, put your nose in the corner, act better. Or go burn off some energy. That's the way I was treated with it. Now, I just said I didn't get treated as a kid, and actually, I haven't been getting treatment that long, relatively speaking. I didn't start getting treated until about 3 or 4 years ago. So I went through a lot before then. Now remember when I said it's going to get personal? It's going to get probably a little bit of downer, so I have a pre-palate cleanser for you. Nothing like a good cat gift to brighten the mood. All right. So, my normal was not normal. For as long as I could remember, I felt this way. There could be a debate about nature versus nurture. For nurture, my childhood was rough. I witnessed physical and verbal abuse between people who were supposed to be my security. They were supposed to be my safe place. I was emotionally abused. This can take many forms. I went through a lot of them. I was left alone from a very, very young age, and I had a hard time making connections because I didn't know how to people. Had very few friends, overweight, ugly, bad hygiene, little guidance, didn't know how to do the things that I should have learned how to do. So I got bullied a lot. I didn't know how to handle emotions, so I cried a lot, lashed out a lot, which really doesn't help make friends. And because it had been that way since I was very young, I blamed myself. I thought it was my fault. I was defective. I was unlikable. I scared people away. I never had a sense of safety at home, so I became afraid of everything. I never really had that safety net that a lot of people do have. And because I was afraid, that lizard brain, fight or flight, I would fight as well and get angry all the time. But above all, I had one enemy in particular. Would you like to meet him? My nemesis, the mirror. Every time I look in the mirror, I see stuff like this. Just talking back to me, telling me this. I absolutely hated what I saw. I couldn't understand how anyone could like me. I couldn't understand how anybody could want to be around me. But it wasn't the mirror saying it. It was my reflection. It was me. It was me telling me this stuff. It was me saying it to myself and me reiterating it to myself and just ingraining it deeper and deeper in my mind. Now, this was normal for most of my life. Sometimes I would try to fake confidence, but it didn't work. Sometimes I would act like things didn't bother me, but that was just delaying it, and they really did. Sometimes I would get angry, and when I say sometimes, I mean all the time. I was paranoid about everything, afraid of everything. I would have deep valleys where I couldn't function. I felt useless. I felt everything I touched was going to mess up. I couldn't focus on anything. And I was constantly in fear of losing my job because I couldn't do my job, because when I got in these valleys, I was just a mess. And I also spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Now, I mentioned that I was a paramedic. I was in public service. I wasn't allowed to have mental illness. I was somebody who treated the sick and the injured. I was not somebody who could be sick or injured. I was too proud for it. We don't get sick, we help the sick. We're above it. And this is something that runs rampant in public service and that kind of field where people are too proud to get help. Hopefully it's changed. I haven't been in that sector in quite a while. I really hope that's different. But from my time on the ambulance, I can name way too many people who I worked with, sitting right next to me, who died of suicide because they couldn't get help, or they didn't want to get help, or they didn't want to admit it. And I was too proud to think it could happen to me. I wasn't confident in anything else other than, no, I definitely can't have mental illness because, no, not me. But then something happened. When I say something, I mean some things. I wish I could say it was a single moment, that one, epiphany said, oh, time to get better. But it wasn't. It was a series of events. While I was a paramedic, I decided I didn't want to be a paramedic anymore, so I went back to college, which led me to where I am now, doing web development, which is awesome. But I went to a community college by my hometown, and one day I was just driving up to class, no test, no speech, nothing out of the ordinary, just an ordinary day in class, and I just had a full-on panic attack. Sitting in the parking lot, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was giving myself every excuse to go home. Oh, maybe I left the microwave on. Maybe, did I feed the cat this morning? I just got to go. And It wasn't the first panic attack I had, but it was the first one that I questioned. Then I graduated, got a career change. Before I got my first development job, I started hanging out in online developer communities, and something that I noticed is that developer communities in general are much more inclusive and understanding than my previous life, and this is amazing. Being able to have conversations, seeing other people having these conversations, it was great. Then I had a health scare. Now, not to go into too much detail here, there was a lump where I shouldn't have a lump, and I got scared, started reevaluating a lot of things. Everything's fine, nothing to worry about there, but it kind of put a lot of things in perspective for me. And I accepted I needed help. This is the hardest. I saw other people living happy lives and not going through the same things I was. People didn't get as angry as easily as I did. People weren't affected by everyday things like I was. And I kind of had an epiphany that maybe everything else wasn't the issue, maybe it was me. It was one of those situations where if everywhere you go smells like dog shit, maybe check your own shoes. For a lot of people, this was the hardest part. All the signs were there, just staring me in the face, bright, bright lights, but I couldn't see them. I was constantly afraid. Had a crippling fear of everyday things. Social situations were paralyzing, which led me to canceling plans all the time. I never showed up to anything that I said I was going to show up to. Made me paranoid about everything. I was not a happy person. Think of that lizard brain. Fight or flight, feed or breed. If I can't make babies with it or eat it, I'm going to run away from it. People thought I was hateful. It was usually a misunderstanding. I was hateful sometimes, but never on purpose. But I realized I had been suffering, and there was something I can do about it. If you've been following along, I took the path of the Jedi. As Yoda once said. But finally, I got treatment. I take medication. I'm a huge fan of better living through chemistry. I see a therapist. I find creative outlets. I find things to do, much like this. I also play bari sax in a couple of community bands. And I start the conversation where I can. But this was not easy. In case you're unaware, the American healthcare system is not stellar. I was able to get into a therapist pretty quickly, get diagnosed pretty quickly, but my therapist could not prescribe any medication, so I had to wait to get a new primary care physician, which took about 6 to 8 weeks to even be seen for my initial consult. During this kind of gray period, this unfortunate period, I attended a talk by Ed Finkler. Does anybody know him or have you heard of him? Okay, so he is the founder of OSME. He does a talk along these lines, goes around and speaks. And again, I will talk about OSME pretty soon. But being in that room, it was a PHP meetup. It was about mental illness in tech. Being in that room that was full of other people, asking the same questions as me, having the same looks as me, helped me realize something extremely important, and that is that we're not alone. Since getting diagnosed, getting treatment, getting rid of the stigma, I realized I'm not alone, which means that we're not alone. Nobody is the only one going through this. To put this in kind of a Drupal-y term, may have different properties and methods, but the interface is the same. I realized I was afraid because of the way that people viewed me, but I don't feel that way anymore because of organizations like OSME. Again, going to talk about them at length in a little bit. All right, since I got treatment, I'm not ashamed of who I am. Before, I wanted to hide because of who I am and my conditions. Now I know it's just a part of me. I'm not too proud to admit that I need help anymore. The valleys aren't as deep. Not to say I don't have deep valleys, but it's much more level. Before, I would have periods where I was way down, couldn't do anything for days, that were offset by periods that were way up. I could be, amazingly productive, just fly, but then go way back down. Now it's much more level, so I don't have those as productive periods of time where I can do stuff really well, but I don't have the valleys that take away from my ability to do stuff, so it kind of evens out, and it's a much more pleasant ride. Since getting on medication and seeing a therapist, I've become much more comfortable in social situations, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here. I'm still pretty introverted, so after this I'm probably going to have to go hide for a while. And I don't have nearly as many anxiety attacks or times when I'm unreasonably afraid of doing things, which is great. And now I work with OSME. OSME stands for Open Sourcing Mental Illness. It was founded by Ed Finkler in 2016. In 2014, 2016, they got 501c3 nonprofit status, and it's focused on erasing the stigma around mental illness, specifically in the tech community. Ed noticed that there was a gap between people knowing what resources were available to them, what rights they had, what they could do, and also there was no research done in the tech community about who else is going through this. It's a great organization. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. If it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be standing here in this spot right now. Also, a little advantage, I can tolerate this thing a little bit more. If you can't read it, it says, even though we don't agree on everything, you have some valid opinions and shouldn't be afraid to share them occasionally, but not too often. Don't wear out your welcome jerk. I say this a lot. I have a lot of slides that say this as well. We're not alone. I mean this in general, but more specifically in the tech community. But why the tech community? It was suspected for a long time. Creatives appeared to be more prone to depression and anxiety. And I say creatives as a broad term. I think any of us who work with websites, with programming, we're creative in some way. We have to figure out problems. We have to think outside the box. There were sites. One was called Devpression, which is now OSME Forums. There was word of mouth. There were people talking in chat rooms. That was all there was to go on. Now, the theory is that intelligent and creative people tend to think over situations more than others. Not just overthink, but think over. And many people can let go of events, not look for the cause-effect connection. But creative thinkers tend to replay events over and over and over again. Has anybody here been working on a bug, can't figure out why it doesn't work, have to close up for the day, but you can't let it go? The drive home is all just, what happened, what happened, what happened? Yeah. Few hands going up. So it expands past that. For me, whenever anything bad happens, I have the exact same scenario. I think, okay, from point A to point B, what led to this? What could I have changed? And it leads me to blaming myself. It leads me to, if I would have done just one thing differently, this wouldn't have happened. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. And it's replaying the thing over and over. And for a lot of people, this can lead to people feeling depressed or hopeless. Now here's a relatively new term. I don't think any of you have heard of this. It's called imposter syndrome. It's basically the feeling that you don't deserve to be doing what you're doing. At any moment, somebody's going to come up and say, caught ya, get out. And I have that a lot, big time. I don't know why the hell I have the job I have. I don't know why people hire me. I don't know why I keep getting accepted to speak. And, I don't understand why I'm here right now. One way that I deal with it, personally, is saying thank you. If somebody says something nice to me, saying thank you. That's one of the hardest things for me. Another thing is realizing that asking for help isn't weakness. Everybody in this room knows something that somebody else doesn't. Expecting one person to know everything about everything is ridiculous. And for me, it was, if I ask my senior, if I ask somebody else, hey, I forgot how to do this thing, or I've never had a chance to do this thing, can you help me get through it? I thought that they would see me as a fraud and start shouting from the rooftops, hey, this guy's a phony, get him out of here. It's okay to have limits, okay to show that you have limits. And it's common. It's common with everybody that you talk to, everybody that I've talked to. It happens. All right, I've been going on for a while, so now I have some questions for you. May seem silly, but I still want to ask them. Would you tell someone with glasses or contacts to try looking harder? No? Okay. Would you ask someone in a wheelchair why they decided not to walk?
No.
Yeah. Would you tell someone with diabetes or a heart condition, stop taking their medicine and snap out of it? Yeah. Pretty silly, right? Well, let's play Mad Libs. Would you tell someone with depression to try being happy? This does happen. Would you ask someone in a panic attack if they considered trying harder to not have anxiety? Would you tell someone with ADHD to stop taking their medicine, just try focusing? This does happen. We all live on the internet. We've all seen memes. Some of my favorites. Nice, beautiful picture of a forest. This is an antidepressant. And then some very helpful medication. This is shit. I don't need pills to be happy. I do. What if I told you you don't need antidepressants if you lift? All of these say the same thing to me. It's a choice. It's something that you can will yourself out of. It's a decision to feel the way that you feel. If it's a choice, I would have never felt this way at all. It's saying that you don't need help. It's something that you could just, wave a magic wand and be fine. Now, I can vouch for the effects of medication. But everyone is different, and what works for me may not work for someone else. If exercise gets somebody through it, great, awesome, go for it. But don't shame me for taking medication because that helps me. Sure, there's a few side effects. I drink a lot of water, which really isn't a negative side effect because everybody should drink more water. But the benefits greatly outweigh these side effects. And we have our own meme. If you can't read that, it says, if you can't make your own neurotransmitters, store-bought is fine. So, how do we get past this stigma? Well, to do it, we have to be stronger than fear. And when I say that, I don't mean we have to beat our fear at arm wrestling. I mean, we have to start the conversation, or at least be open to starting the conversation, or listening. Let people know that they matter. Don't be ashamed if you have something. It's not a choice. It's not a defect. It's a disease. You're not damaged. You have a disease. Be respectful. This is a big one. Not all disabilities are visible. Not all cuts bleed. So try to be respectful of what you say or how you portray diseases. So, being sad because you missed a movie, that's not the same as being depressed. That's not the same as having depression. Liking to be organized, liking to not have your desk be a mess, that is not the same as OCD. I gave a talk to Marketo, when it was Marketo, I don't even know what they changed the name to, but before me, a woman with OCD gave her talk, told her story, and so some of the things that she said really resonated with me. How with OCD, it's a compulsion. It is something that your mind is telling you you have to do. And the example she gave is, imagine that you are deathly allergic to blueberries. If you eat a blueberry, if you touch a blueberry, if you even sniff a blueberry, you're going to die. But your brain is telling you, if you don't eat that plate of blueberries, everything you care about, everything you've ever loved is going to be destroyed. That's what OCD is. It's not saying, you know what, I just prefer that this be over here. So that's something that really, really struck a chord with me. And to be frank, it really annoys the shit out of me when somebody says, oh, I'm OCD, oh, I'm OCD. No, you like not being in a mess. But if you do feel that you have a disease, please get treatment. See somebody, talk to somebody. Now, anecdotes are one thing. I've told a lot of stories here, but facts help show that I'm not completely full of shit. One of the things that OSME does, we do science. And when I say that, we take a survey, or we provide a survey every year. These are results from the 2017. Had about 800 responses. I've got some answers from the 2016 survey on here. But the survey is US-based, made available to several different communities, and all the responses are self-reported. Now, one of the questions, would you bring up a physical health issue with a potential employer at an interview? Well, for physical, yes, 23, no, 37. Pretty evenly spread. Would you bring up a mental health issue? Yes is only 5%. Now, I'm not saying that you have to walk into an interview and say, hey, ADHD here. But, there's often a question, would you require any kind of reasonable accommodations? Most of us will probably say no, or, don't worry about it and just suffer. Now, one question that really is important to me is, do you feel being identified as a person with mental health issue would hurt your career? Only 12% are in the negative here. This is from 2016. We had a lot more responses then as well, but only 12% is negative. That says a lot. Do you feel that having mental illness will hurt your career? 12% don't have that fear. I worry about that every time I give this talk, but it's really kind of freeing knowing that all my cards are on the table, and if somebody hires me after Googling my name and seeing on Drupal.tv all these videos of me, then, good for them. Now, do you think discussing a physical health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? Yes, only 4%. Hey, I broke my leg. Maybe I need some help getting up and down the stairs. Do you think discussing a mental health issue would have negative consequences? 23%. Hey, I'm having a bad day. I'm depressed. I can't function. I need a day off. Well, too bad. We're going to treat you differently. That has happened to me. Now, I like to preface this. Have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition? The average in the US is around 20%. This is self-reported from 800 responses. Have you been diagnosed? Average is 20%, yes, for 43% in the tech community of the people who responded. Now, that's just diagnosed. Next question, do you think you have a mental health condition? This includes that diagnosed portion. Don't know, possibly, so we add quite a bit more onto that. With that, only 30 or 29% of people say with any certainty, no. This includes the people who answered yes to diagnose. I do want to preface that. Or I guess now it's not prefacing because I already said it, but yeah, so that means that this blue section and this yellow section, either for some reason, are afraid to get treatment, don't have access to treatment, don't know what their options are, don't know what their company provides, if their company provides anything. It also means that, well, for one thing, we're afraid to talk about mental illness, whether it be in the workplace or in personal space. But it also means, looking at those numbers, it means that we're not alone. There are a lot of people going through this. We're afraid because of the stigma. It's a dangerous thing. It frightens people. It prevents people from admitting that they need help. We're afraid that people will change their opinion of us. If they find out how we feel, or what we think, or what we do, that they're going to change their mind about how they approach us or how they are around us. And if you have anxiety, worrying what people think can be scary. Worrying if they're talking about you can be terrifying. Worrying, what your boss is saying, or if they're having private meetings to get rid of you, that can just destroy you from the inside. For some of us, especially me, our minds go straight to the worst case scenario. Has anybody ever had a hard time logging into your work email? Yeah.
I'm sorry, when you say having a hard time logging into email, we're not talking about technical functions. We're just I don't feel like checking.
No, I'm sorry. Accidentally type in the wrong password, or try to log in and it said log in, or cannot log in. When it happens to me, I immediately start brushing up my resume because I assume that I've been fired because I can't get into my email. I've gotten better about that. I don't immediately go to my resume, go to Indeed, or anything like that. Try to calm down a bit. But it's kind of a binary mind, and it's something I'm working on. If it's not good, it's bad. If it's not great, it's horrible. There's no in-between for me. At least there wasn't. I'm getting better at that. Baby steps. At work, we're afraid we might get sent to the HR. How many of you know your HR rep on a first name basis, can point them out? Wow, I'm impressed. Or a little bit scared, because knowing your HR rep on a first name basis could be a good or a bad thing depending on what kind of employee you are. I worked at a job where I didn't. It was a remote job. I didn't have that ability to connect with my HR rep. I talked to her once when I first got hired, well, a couple times when I first got hired, fill out some paperwork, but after that, nothing. Until I got diagnosed, and I took it pretty hard, realizing that, hey, now I have this name for it. It has a name. It has power over me. And then I realized, though, maybe if I take a day off to just recuperate, things will be better. So I contacted my direct boss, my direct supervisor, said, listen, I have depression. I just found out, I didn't just find out, but I just got diagnosed. I'd like a day to take to myself. And it was a situation, I can't really talk to you about this, hang up, and I get a call back from HR. And I had to tell the entire story again. Somebody that I work with on a daily basis, that I was comfortable with, now I have to talk to somebody that I don't know. It didn't work out. I didn't last there much longer because I felt that as soon as I disclosed, they started edging me towards not being there anymore. Now, in 2015, 43.4 million adults 18 or older were diagnosed with any mental illness in the past year. That's a lot. 17.9 doesn't seem like a big number, but 43.4 million US adults. Okay, but why should a workplace care about that? Let's put a dollar sign on it. Depression alone, just depression, this much of that giant handbook, impacts 9.5% of the American adult population, which causes up to 200 million lost work days, costing employers up to $44 billion with a B, $44 billion annually, which is a lot of money. So, if you're asking, what can we do? How can we help? Well, I think that if a workplace can create a culture of inclusiveness, an employee may feel more comfortable being open. Like I said, I had that situation where I just got diagnosed. Before that, I would do very little for days. I would lie on my timesheet. I don't work there anymore. I could say what I want. I'd lie on my timesheet. I would, say that I was putting in my 40 hours. In reality, I was working maybe 16 of that, if even. And I would get angry, which would send me deeper into a downward spiral. I'd get afraid because I wasn't succeeding. Put that with my imposter syndrome, worrying that the bottom's going to fall out at any time. It wasn't a good situation. If I felt that the culture were inclusive, that they were open to employees having rough times, open to just calling up to say mental health day, I think that things would have worked out a lot differently. Now, one way that I think about it is all those weeks where I put in maybe 16 hours of actual work and still billed for 40. If I could have just taken one day off without having to worry about it to recharge, it would have been more 32 hours of billable work that were actual hours of work and 8 hours of PTO. It would have been a much better situation for all of us. But I never felt that I could say I need a day off until I did, and it backfired and blew up in my face. If you are really interested in helping, we're still doing the survey. OSMEhelp.org/research it's not a short survey, it's about 20 minutes. Every response really helps, and it helps us direct our efforts, what we need to do, how we should be focusing on things. Another initiative that OSME has is handbooks. So we have a set of 3 handbooks, all based on the ADA, all based on, all vetted by lawyers and psychologists. So it's not just a bunch of us sitting in a room saying, hey, I think this is a good idea. No, it's been put through the ringer, and they're really great. It's Mental Health and Tech Guidelines for Mental Wellness in the Workplace, which is about creating a culture of inclusivity. Guidelines for executives and HR professionals, which are, the top level, and there's guidelines for employees, which is more of a know your rights according to the ADA. They're DRM free. I think on LeanPub it's like $10 for all 3, but if you want, they're open source. I think we have it on GitBooks. Don't quote me on that. But seriously, if you could, I'd appreciate if every one of you could take the OSME survey. It's not a short survey, 20 minutes, but every response really helps. All right. So we're fortunate. We're here at an open source tech conference. And here, community is our greatest resource. tech community in general, open source community, it's our greatest resource. All of you around are the greatest resource that I have. 43% of the survey respondents said that they have some form of mental illness with a diagnosis. Said it before, said it again, it means we're not alone. It also means that we are more than usernames, which is something that events like this help remind us of. A lot of people, I still refer to them by username when I see them out in the hall, but we're more than that. We're not just ones and zeros. We're real people, we're here interacting, we're talking about stuff that's important to us, we're learning stuff from some of the greatest minds in this field, and we're all equals here. Also means that we're not damaged. And with a little work, together we can erase a stigma. I've provided just a few resources here. OSMEhelp.org, if you're interested in OSME, a lot more information about them than I could put into any 50-minute talk. PsychologyToday.com is a great website, built in Drupal, but it's also a great find a therapist tool that can get very granular, has very, very faceted search where you can find, the kind of therapist that you would be most comfortable with or that you think you'd be most comfortable with. Suicide Lifeline, if you're having thoughts without a plan or just concern for somebody that you care about, that's a number. But if you are having thoughts with a plan, or if you need help, if somebody that you know is talking about it, don't hesitate to call 911. They may hate you in the short term, but the results afterwards, they'll be there. Also something I didn't really go into, mental health first aid. I highly recommend anybody who can get this, gets this. It's a class that is very similar to regular first aid. It's not diagnosing, it's not, putting labels on things, it's triaging, it's recognizing symptoms, recognizing signs. And I think that for people in supervisory management positions, this is great. How many people have had burnout or have seen people who are showing signs of burnout way too late? Yeah, it's really common, especially in this field. It helps recognize that, and when the supervisor or manager has that, then maybe they'll see, hey, this person's been putting in a lot of hours. Maybe something's going on. Are you okay? Are we putting too much work on you? What can we do to make things better? It's generally free or donation-based. They have classes all over the country, and you have to recert every couple years, but it's great. And yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you for letting me talk with you. I appreciate it. And I'd like to open up for questions if anybody has any. Yeah.
Do you have anything specific, like any specific examples, I guess I should say, where companies are what they're actually doing to cultivate that culture that creates the openness about mental health? I know we are actively trying to do that, so I don't know if you have.
Who is we're? Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's the example I was going to give because.
Perfect.
Yeah, Matt wrote a blog post and I wrote a blog post in response. That was one of the most humbling experiences of my life when he approached me and said, hey, we're doing this after seeing your talk. So that would be the only example I could think of. The company I work for is not necessarily trying to actively create a culture, but just has that kind of culture. Every 2 weeks, my boss has a one-on-one with me, and it's no agenda, just, hey, what's going on? What do you want to talk about? How are things going? And when he notices, I did go through a rough patch not too long ago where I was just in a funk. I wasn't happy. A lot of things were going on here and there. And he just reached out, hey, is everything okay? And my initial response was, oh yeah, it's fine. Okay. And then, thought about it. And because I feel that rapport with my boss, which is very rare, admittedly, I was able to go, you know what? No, everything's not okay. We need to talk. Some things have been bothering me, and here's why. So I think that's, whether or not it's evolving into a culture of inclusivity or if it's already there, but I don't have any examples other than Lullabot of the evolution. Yeah, I hope that answered or responded at least. Yeah.
When you see, when you recognize symptoms or signs in other people that maybe they could use some help, but you think they haven't had a chance to get diagnosed or talked to someone, how do you, or have you had an occasion for this where you'd open up a dialogue, or how do you handle that? How would you recommend that?
That is a very, very, very difficult situation, especially in the workplace. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. I
Yeah.
can focus more towards, because the second that you go up to somebody and say, hey, I think that you might need some help, that's opening up an HR nightmare. That's opening up, this person's harassing me and putting a label on me, and, I don't like it. I think one thing that I've seen that works is instead of singling one person out, if there's a way to kind of open it up to everybody and hope that it resonates with the person that you're trying to reach. One example of that is a friend of mine saw my talk in Boston not too long ago, and he came up, he's like, hey, I've got somebody, kind of the same situation you're describing. Hey, I've got somebody I work with, I think that he could probably use some help. Would you mind if I sent him the video? And recommended, if you're going to do it, maybe send it out as a company email. Hey, I saw this talk, I thought it was great. I don't care about YouTube views, I'm not trying to be self-promotion there. It's just, if you send it to the entire company as a, hey, look at this, rather than singling out one person, then hope that it resonates. The other side of it is, if the person is having difficulties, they're not producing, they're not doing what they should be doing, and they don't disclose that they need accommodation. If they don't go to HR and say, I have a disability, here's what I need to succeed, then that person isn't protected, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's a horrible catch-22. You can't say, hey, I think you benefit from some help, but you can't help them until they say, hey, I'm a person who needs these accommodations. All of that is kind of outlined in the handbooks as well. For that scenario specifically is probably in the executives and HR, because it's dangerous. You got to walk on eggshells in that situation. I wish I had a better answer than that, but as Sue happy as we can be in this country, you got to be careful. Anybody else?
Imagine that we work together in a team.
Mhm.
I am not your manager, but I'm the PM. I'm the person leading the team. What should I do to make you more comfortable, and why I shouldn't do?
That's what you shouldn't do. And this is an actual example of what happened to me with somebody that I worked with in a team. And I use the term team very loosely because I never felt like part of his team. Never, ever publicly shame somebody for not knowing something. The exact thing that happened was I was developing on a site. There was something infused that I had never done before. Might have been pretty common, but the scenario just never brought itself up to me to have to do this. And so I didn't realize Views was capable of doing it. So I went a different route. I tried something different and pushed up a PR, asked for a review. Instead of making comments on it, the guy was 2 desks away from me, very loud voice, in an open office. Why the hell would you do something like that? What are you thinking? You should know better than that. You've been doing this long enough now. That's not what you should do. If you're working with somebody you noticed, it never hurts to ask, are you okay? Is there anything I can help you with? Just don't say it accusatorily, like, hey, you okay? I think that you might have something. Just try to make sure that, just be good people. All right, we're at about time. I don't want to keep anybody from lunch, but if there's any more questions, I'm going to be hanging out around here for a while. Feel free to come up, tap me on the shoulder. And so thank you for coming.
Thank you.